Hearty shalom to you, Jeffrey Seif here. Glad you're out there and glad you're going with me on a journey into biblical literature. Paul, as seems the case with this man, gets in trouble every now and again. He speaks his mind, and the only way to avoid criticism is to say nothing, be nothing, and do nothing. And anybody who stands up into the land of the living is going to get some pushback, some blowback. Well, what's interesting in Acts chapter 23, verses 23 through 35, is we see Paul is in the hand of the Greeks now, and you know what? They're treating him good. They're doing it right. I mention that because the commander, we're told in verse 23, calls two centurions and says at the third hour of the night, we're looking at about 9 p.m., prepare 200 soldiers and 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. This is, by the way, a lot of wherewithal. I mention this because Paul was taken into custody. He's under arrest now. He's going to be taken off to Caesarea Maritime in order to present before the governor. The commander has tried to sort this thing out. He'll say as much, that there was a ruckus. He seized the man, took him before their Sanhedrin, to use his language. He took Paul before the Jewish tribunal, and that was more confusing than anything. So he takes Paul back again into custody. He realizes there's some, attempt on his life. He wants to protect that. He doesn't really know what's going on, but the man is acting fairly. He's acting fairly, and I like to see that. In fact, Luke, by the way, never paints centurions in a bad light, or the Roman military. Of course, Paul is out there ministering in the Greco-Roman world, and we're told here that a number of military personnel are involved in the escort to take this arrested person from point A to point B. Now, I have 20 years in law enforcement. I've seen people get arrested and taken from point A to point B. Never with all of this. I mean, this is a real show of force. Someone wants to ensure that justice prevails. He's aware there's a plot on a man's life. And it's interesting here how individuals of non-Jewish extract gather around to support the man. And I like that. So he, in verse 24, provides mounts for Paul to ride in order that he might be brought before Felix, the governor. And then subsequent to that, there's a letter that accompanies Paul and this group. And he basically informs of what had happened. In verse 28, he says he wanted to know more about the charge. So I brought him to their Sanhedrin, but he couldn't sort it out. But what he did ascertain from dealing with the Sanhedrin, looking at verse 29, that there was nothing worthy of death or imprisonment. Felix, however, is more expert on this. There is a problem. The commander realizes that people are hell-bent on the man's life, and he's confused, wants to know why. So he defers to Felix. We're told in verse 31, after the letters delivered and the prisoners delivered, we're told that the soldiers, in keeping with their orders, took Paul and brought him. On the next day, they returned to headquarters, leaving the horsemen to go on with them. And they came to Caesarea and delivered the aforementioned letter and the prisoner, we're told. And upon reading the letter, the governor asked what province Paul was from, subsequent to which he said he was from Cilicia. Paul, by the way, was from Tarsus, as Bible readers are aware. He was a Hebrew, but he didn't have an Israeli passport. I use that expression. They weren't giving passports back then. But if you look at the group, the principal group of Jesus' leaders, they're from the Galilee, and the ministry is headquartered in Jerusalem. Paul, however, is from Turkey, eastern, southern Turkey, and he is gives voice to that he's not from Judea proper. And by the way, Tarsus was a university town, which might account for why Paul was well-versed in things Hebrew as a Pharisee, plus things Greek. Smart guy. Well, the letter is delivered to Festus, and he says in verse 35, I'll give you a hearing when your accusers have arrived. Again, that's fair. That there's a ruckus there, and there's no point trying to sort it out now. You need to hear the accuser, hear the prosecution, hear the defense, and sort it all out. That's the way to do it. Then we're told he gave orders for Paul to be guarded in Herod's praetorium. You can visit Caesarea Maritime today, and I hope you will visit Israel if you haven't. You know, one trip to Israel is worth a year of these lessons for me. It brings it alive. I've been to what's left of the ruins of Caesarea Maritime. It's really a fascinating place, and you can see there where the palace was, where it protruded out into the Mediterranean Sea. The waves have beaten it up considerably, and so not a lot of it's left, but enough is left there that it corroborates the biblical story. Caesarea Maritime was the Roman headquarters, the Roman home away from home. The situation in Jerusalem, that the Romans dispatched personnel to the Antonia fortress, which looms just over the temple proper, especially in festival times. The Romans knew the Jews were predisposed to be chafing against Roman authorities, so they brought extra troops there. They'd come out of the fortress into the temple complex proper. They were set up that way. While Romans are garrisoned in Jerusalem still, the headquarters in Caesarea. So they bring Paul there. And I want to underscore here how Paul is noted as being treated justly by the Gentiles. And, you know, I think that's a very, very good thing, as I noted. The Jewish authorities are being rather squirrely, rather emotional, rather upset, driven by spirits and the like, and whereas we're looking for justice here. You know, and would that we all gave biblical people and biblical verse a fair trial. I mention that because it seems that justice, you know, people are so driven by emotions today. And I like sorting it out where cooler spirits prevail and people make executive decisions based on facts. I've encountered this in my own career in law enforcement where, you know, you respond to a scene, the emotions are flared, tensions are high, and she's saying this and he's saying that. It goes back and forth. And to try and settle it down, get to the facts, hear the respective stories, see what kind of physical evidence corroborates what, and then, you know, resolve the situation. There needs to be some kind of dissolution. You can't leave it like that. And that really is what's at play here. And that striving for objectivity, I think, is so important in life because people lose their sense of that. And Luke here, as I'd said earlier, he wants to underscore that the Gentiles were doing it right. Of course, if you look at Luke's readers, in large measure, Luke is out there in the Greco-Roman world ministering with Paul to individuals of non-Jewish extract and Jewish extract. And he is not wanting to cast aspersions on the Roman juridical process. And he wants to underscore that Paul was treated fairly, that Paul's circumstances are driven by Jewish angst, but not just that, it's by the Lord. Paul was told earlier that the Lord is working through this in order to get him to Rome. But I like the clarity with which the centurion and those others are represented, because I think there's a window there into a kind of cogency and decency that we do well to employ when we're forced to make executive decisions about circumstances around us. I don't know what you're going through in life, but I deal with people and circumstance, and I want to look at it clearly, just like I see here in the book of Acts. God bless. Let's do this again next week, okay? Ciao.